is Damien, and welcome back to Somatic Abundance. Now, this is a very special episode, so I'm going to be talking about something a bit different. The work we do here is all about somatic abundance. And this isn't something I've created from a book. It's not something you can simply sit down, read about, and you will understand it. This is something that's been born out of more than 30 years of experience, helping people transform their lives. And perhaps, in some ways more importantly, learning what it actually means to live a life you want to live, an abundant life. When I first started in hypnotherapy, 1 or 2 years ago, one of the things I was quite rightly asked to do from the very start was help people with money problems. People would come to me and they felt there wasn't enough money coming through their lives. It was a problem then, it's still a problem now. They just felt that money wasn't coming in quickly enough to pay the bills. And back then we used to do the affirmations, we'd do the mindset work, we'd do the visualization. And for a while things would improve. Money would start coming in again. Things would seem to be changing. And then, more often than not, the money would dry up again, the opportunities disappear, and the person would come back in for another session, and then another, and then another. And I started wondering, I became curious about what was happening underneath it all. Because it seemed like there was another voice somewhere within them. A voice speaking about money, about abundance, and how we might experience it. I kind of got to realizing that with traditional abundance techniques, with the affirmations, the vision boards, the visualizations, we are often trying to speak over that voice. We try to drown it out with new information. But what if that voice has an important part in our lives? What if that voice isn't something we need to shut out? It is just something we need to be aware of. What if that voice is part of our protective system, part of our nervous system? We can't simply drown that out. We can't just switch it off. However, we can give it new information. We can give it the basis for a new informed decision about what is dangerous and what's not. And that is where somatics comes into it. And this is really where my thinking began to change. Because instead of simply telling ourselves what we want, we stop just trying to reiterate over and over again, I want the fancy car, I want the fancy car, I want the fancy car, and maybe a fancy car will turn up. What if we could communicate with our nervous system in a language it actually understands? Not a language of the cognitive mind of thought, but a language of experience, a language of feeling, a language of the body, because this is how these voices get embedded within us, not through words, but through experience. And that's how I begin to understand what I call now the body language of abundance. You can think about something you want. Just take a breath right now and think about it. Perhaps it's money, maybe a new home, a relationship, a new car. Something that when you imagine having it, it really does give you a particular feeling. And here's the interesting thing. That image is probably not the real thing that you're looking for. I'd put money on the fact that if you want a new car, it's probably not the colour, it's not the brand, the model, but you may well be looking for the freedom, the luxury, or the pride in having that car, or perhaps just feeling that you've arrived. The car is a picture. The feeling underneath the picture is what we are really reaching for. And that feeling, that state, that is the language of the nervous system. That is the body language of abundance. And that language has become a large part of my life's work. Because when we speak it natively, everything changes. So, I'd like you to try something with me now. You don't need to close your eyes unless you want to. Just think of something you genuinely want. Something that matters to you. Allow yourself to imagine having, right now, just for a moment. Really see it. Notice the colours of it, the texture. See it right there. Notice where you are. What is around you? And now, notice what you would feel like if you had it in reality. Don't try to label it. Don't try to name the feeling. Just notice how it feels. Maybe there's a warmth, an openness, a freedom, perhaps an excitement. You might have your own feelings completely. You don't have to get it right. Just notice. And now, let the picture begin to fade. You don't need the image anymore. Just let the detail soften. The colours go grey, vague. The story drift away, and just for a moment, keep hold of the feeling. It might be subtle, but it's there, and that's enough. Because this is where the exploration begins. This is where the adventure begins. You see, one of the things I've discovered about this work is that abundance isn't necessarily something we have to manufacture. We may already have experienced it. Perhaps you've felt it before. Maybe just for a few minutes. Maybe just a few seconds. Perhaps you didn't even recognize it as abundance at the time. A moment of freedom, a moment of connection, a moment of absolute joy. A moment when everything just simply felt enough. The body may already know something about that feeling. And that changes the question. Instead of asking, how do I attract abundance? We begin to ask, why does abundance already live within me? Now that is a very different question, because now we're not trying to create something from nothing. We are looking for a thread, a hint, a first touch, something already alive within our experience. And somatic abundance works with those threads of experience. And with those threads, we can begin to craft a beautifully rich tapestry, which is our life. And this is exactly the place the first whisper came from. Because sometimes that first contact with abundance isn't dramatic, it's quiet, almost imperceptible. A warmth, a breath, a moment of ease, a tiny shift somewhere inside you, a whisper. You know, many people spend too much time waiting for the abundance to arrive like an explosion. That big opportunity, the windfall, the perfect relationship, the dream home. The moment when everything suddenly changes. But what if we become sensitive to the quieter moments? What if we learn to hear the whisper? You know, there's something rather extraordinary about a whisper. We tend to think that something powerful should be loud. But you know, there is an event in our universe that it's probably the single most powerful event that happens is when two black holes collide. And it is singularly probably the most powerful event we know of. And yet when we detect that collision, when it reaches us, it doesn't reach us as an explosion. It's not a loud boom traveling across space. It's a tiny ripple, a whisper of a shift in gravity. Something unimaginably powerful, arriving as something almost imperceptible. And you know, maybe that's how the universe speaks. Maybe that's how abundance is. Because the first thing we notice isn't the explosion, it's the whisper. So I created the first whisper, not as a course, not as another collection of affirmations, not as another exercise in trying to convince yourself that you have already everything you could want. It's simply a standalone somatic experience. It's an opportunity for you to experience that first contact with the state of abundance for yourself. And we begin with that genuine desire, that thing that you really want. And we explore the feeling beneath it, the state beneath it, and we just get rid of the image, let it fade. Because when we discover that real feeling, the one that lives within you, not manufacturing it, not forcing it, just recognizing it, giving it the space and time to breathe, and then taking that awareness into your everyday life through a simple daily practice. Because the real exploration isn't only what happens during the session, it's what happens everywhere. And when you begin to notice those little whispers in ordinary moments, a moment of gratitude, a moment of connection, a moment of pleasure, a moment when life feels unexpectedly full, you begin to recognize them. You find them in the body, you give them space, and you breathe through them, because the more familiar we become with those threads, the more easily we begin to recognize the tapestry they belong to. So you can enjoy the first whisper as a standalone full somatic experience for just $39. You can keep it, listen to it as often as you like. And there is something I'd like you to note about what you're getting. This isn't a simplified version of the work. This experience I've created here is based on the same foundational processes I use when I first work with someone one-to-one with somatic abundance. Obviously, working privately gives us a lot more opportunity to go further. And what we can explore goes even deeper, but the first whisper gives you the opportunity to experience that first step for yourself, to open that door, to discover what happens when you move beyond simply thinking about abundance and begin to experience it in your life. You know, I've called it the first whisper because I don't want to tell you what you're going to discover. I don't want to tell you what abundance should feel like to you. Your body gets to tell you that. This is simply an invitation to make that first contact, to hear the first whisper, and perhaps to become more curious about what you hear it next. You'll find the first whisper through the link in the show's notes. There's no urgency. Take your time whenever you feel ready. Whenever you feel ready to explore a deeper sense of abundance in your life every single day. You can notice what you've already experienced today. And perhaps you've already felt your own little whisper. And if you find yourself curious, if some part of you is wondering, what it would be like to explore this more deeply, then perhaps that's enough. Because you've found your first thread, and when you're ready, you can follow that thread and join me in the first whisper. I look forward to seeing you inside.